The first snowfall of the season whispered across the rooftops of Český Krumlov, cloaking the Czech town in a pale, ghostly hush. Street lamps flickered in the fog, their golden halos swallowed by the cold breath of winter. In the attic of an ivy-choked house overlooking the Vltava River, Emil Kraus, a solitary linguist and translator of dead languages, sat hunched over a lacquered wooden desk. His fingers hovered above the ancient manuscript that had arrived 3 days prior, delivered without a return address, wrapped in black cloth, sealed with crimson wax bearing no crest, only a spiral sigil that seemed to shimmer when the candlelight touched it. The book was wrong. Not just strange, wrong in the way a twisted tree in a sunless forest feels wrong. It had no title. No publisher's mark. The pages, yellowed and brittle, held no letters, no punctuation. Instead, every inch was filled with elaborate spiral patterns, like mazes drawn by a mad hand. Some spirals stretched across entire pages, others nested inside each other like parasitic eggs. Emil couldn't make sense of it, and yet, he couldn't stop staring. The letter that came with it was brief. Translate. Begin at the center. You are the only one who can hear them. He had laughed when he first read that. He wasn't laughing anymore. Emil hadn't slept in 2 days. At first, it had been curiosity that drove him. He thought the spirals might be a cipher, a visual language yet unknown. Then he began to dream in spirals, and those dreams followed him into the waking world. Now, even with his eyes open, he could hear faint whispers. They began that morning. It was 3:44 a.m. Snow fell silently outside. The attic smelled of old paper, candle wax, and the faint, coppery tang of blood, though Emil couldn't find the source. He was sketching the 3rd page of the manuscript onto tracing paper when a low, sibilant voice slithered through the silence. Tis, Karl, low hash. Emil froze. The sound hadn't come from outside, nor from his phone, which lay dead. It came from inside his skull, between his ears, as though the words had bypassed his ears entirely. Who's there? He whispered. The attic remained still. He rubbed his eyes and blinked at the spiral. It had changed. No, not possible. But the center was different. Where before there had been a solid black core, now there was a tiny crack as though the spiral had fractured under pressure. Another whisper, you hear, because you remember. He stood up so quickly the chair scraped back and toppled. Heart hammering, Emil stumbled to the window and opened it. Freezing wind bit his skin. No voices. No one in the streets below. When he turned back, the spiral was glowing, faintly like old embers in a dead hearth. Emil picked up his pencil and felt his hand move almost on its own, sketching a line he didn't recognize in a language he didn't know, but understood. The mouth of the dead opens not in words but in echoes. And you, soul translator, are the echo chamber. His vision blurred. Blood trickled from his left nostril. The spiral shifted again. This time Emil did scream. Because the spiral was no longer a symbol. It was an eye, slit-pupiled, golden, and impossibly deep, blinking up at him from the page. Outside, the bells of St. Vitus Church rang out, once, twice, 3 times, though the clock read 2:02 a.m. It had rung 11 times. And Emil, still staring at the eye, whispered without thinking, in the spiral tongue. The door is open. The candle had burned to its base, its last flickers casting shadows that twisted like worms across the ceiling. Emil sat motionless, eyes locked with the thing on the page. Not a symbol. Not a pattern. It was an eye, and it was watching him. He didn't know how long he had stared into it. Minutes? Hours? His body was numb as if the cold from the outside had seeped into his bones, but he couldn't move. His limbs were statues. Only his mind raced, and even that was beginning to feel like it was being pulled apart. The eye blinked. What? Slowly. And then it vanished. The spiral returned, innocent and silent on the paper, as if nothing had happened. Emil fell back into the toppled chair and gasped. His throat was dry. His shirt stuck to his back, soaked in cold sweat. For a moment, the only sound was the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs, a sound he usually never noticed. Now it ticked too loud. Too human, almost like labored breathing. He forced himself to stand, hands trembling. His reflection in the attic window didn't quite match. He turned his head right, but the reflection turned left, just a second too slow. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing icy water on his face, gripping the sink like a drowning man. When he looked up at the mirror, he expected to see his reflection, pale and sunken. But instead, the spiral was etched onto his forehead. He screamed and clutched at it, only to find nothing. No mark. No blood. Just smooth skin. A hallucination. It had to be. Sleep deprivation surely. He staggered back to the attic, determined to put the book away to lock it up. But when he opened the drawer where he had placed it, it wasn't there. The book now sat on his desk, open to a new page. More spirals. Smaller. Tighter. Like microscopic galaxies collapsing inward. His vision swam as he looked. The whispering returned, louder this time. Dozens of voices. Hundreds. Some weeping, others chanting, one laughing. A child's laugh, wet and broken like bubbles in a drowning throat. Translate, they said in unison. You are the vessel. Emil staggered back. I didn't ask for this. But the whispers ignored him. He reached for the phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but as he unlocked the screen he realized all his contacts were gone. Every single one. Replaced with names written in the same spiral language. The top name blinked. Shar-Zhal'nith. And beneath it in English. The one who opens. The phone vibrated. An incoming message. He opened it. You have begun. You cannot unread the eye. He dropped the phone. It cracked on the wooden floor, but the screen kept glowing. A faint hum filled the room, like a swarm of insects whispering scripture. He turned back to the book. And this time the spiral had grown. Physically. It now extended off the page. Literally. The lines had begun to etch themselves into the wood of the desk, slowly carving a perfect spiral into the surface. He watched, horrified, as the grooves deepened, spinning toward a hole. No, not a hole. A tunnel. Something moved inside. A pale finger, bony and long, emerged from the spiral, twitching as it touched the air. Emil screamed and slammed the book shut. Instantly everything stopped. Silence returned, deep and unnatural. No wind. No ticking. Not even the sound of his own breathing. He realized then he had begun to bleed from his ears. He backed away from the desk, heart hammering, and locked the book inside an old iron box beneath the floorboards. The box had once belonged to his grandfather, an occultist in Prague who'd vanished under strange circumstances. Emil never believed the old family stories. Until now. He secured the box with chains. Padlocks. Bolts. Holy water. Crosses. Salt. Anything. But that night, as he tried to sleep on the couch in the living room, he heard the sound again. Not from the attic this time. From beneath the floor. Scratch. 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 Like something tracing a spiral on the underside of the floorboards. He covered his ears, curled into himself, and whispered to whatever was listening. Leave me alone. I won't translate anymore. But he knew it was a lie. Because deep inside him the language was growing, spreading through his mind like roots. When he closed his eyes he no longer dreamed in color. He dreamed in spirals. In voices. In fire and ash and a screaming that sounded like the cracking of the sky. And in those dreams a cathedral stood in ruins, impossibly vast, made of bone and black stone. Above it hovered the eye again, not drawn but alive. Watching. Waiting. And it whispered his name. Oh, the one who translates souls. Come home. Morning came without light. Thick fog smothered the town like a burial shroud, blanketing Shar-Zhal'nith in silence. The snow had stopped, but everything remained deathly still, as if time itself was hesitating. Emil hadn't slept. He had tried. Truly. But the whispers had returned with a vengeance, chanting now in strange rhythms. The book, despite the padlocks, the salt, the chains, had begun humming. A low, almost melodic vibration that pulsed through the floor, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. That was the final straw. He needed help. Not from a priest or a psychiatrist. They would either exorcise him or institutionalize him. Emil needed someone who understood language. The kind of language that didn't belong to any nation. The kind written by hands long dead, perhaps never human to begin with. He thought of one man. Gregor Vanya. A recluse, a forgotten academic, expelled from Charles University in Prague nearly 2 decades ago for obsessive and dangerous linguistic experimentation. Rumors claimed he had once tried to recreate a language from an ancient tomb in Sardinia, one not meant to be spoken aloud. After a student assistant went mad, foaming at the mouth and babbling spiral-like syllables before gouging out his own eyes, Vanya vanished. Emil had read about him years ago. Now he tracked the only known lead to a remote monastery-turned-personal archive outside Telk, 3 hours east. By train. The train ride was quiet, too quiet. There were no announcements, no conductor, and only 2 passengers. Emil and a sleeping old woman who never moved, not even when the train screeched around frozen bends. Emil sat with his coat pulled tight and his satchel on his lap. He had wrapped the cursed book in layers of cloth, placed it inside a metal case and sealed it with tape. but it still pulsed. Not physically but in his mind. As though it knew he was trying to escape it. Worse, he could feel the language now. It was no longer something he had to read. It wanted to be spoken. The syllables bubbled up in his throat like bile. Several times he had to bite his tongue, fearing what would happen if he gave them voice. He arrived in Telk just before dusk. The monastery loomed at the edge of a dense forest, its stone walls overgrown with ivy and moss. A single lantern flickered above the door. He knocked once. Then twice. No answer. Just as he turned to leave, the heavy wooden door creaked open on its own. A narrow hallway stretched into the dark, lined with decaying books and parchment rolls. "Hello," Emil called. Silence. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. He froze, but a raspy voice called from the end of the corridor, "Down here." Emil followed it into a vaulted chamber lit by candlelight and filled with ancient texts, scrolls, and bones suspended in jars. Sitting at the center was a man wrapped in wool and furs, his face half buried under layers of scarves. Only his eyes showed, milky and blind. "You have the book," the man rasped. "How do you know?" "I heard it," the man whispered. "Even the deaf can hear it." "Are you Gregor Vanya?" The man nodded. "I was." Emil placed the wrapped book on the table. Gregor didn't touch it. "It's opened, hasn't it?" "Yes." "Then it's too late." Emil sat across from him. "What is it? What is this language? Why can I understand it?" Gregor exhaled sharply as if the weight of the question hurt. He leaned forward and slowly unwound the scarf from his face. Emil recoiled. The man had no tongue. Only a scarred pit where it should have been. "I cut it out," Gregor said, voice gurgling, "to stop it from speaking through me. But it didn't work. Now it whispers through my dreams." "What is it?" Emil whispered again. Gregor's hands trembled as he retrieved a worn notebook. On the first page was a word Emil had never seen, but instantly understood. Shar-Zhal'nith. The spiral that devours. Gregor pointed to a crude drawing of the eye. The same one Emil had seen in his dreams. "It is not a language," the man wrote, hand shaking. "It is a living consciousness scattered across dead tongues. When you read it, it reads you. When you understand it, it awakens." Emil's mouth went dry. Gregor continued writing. "It comes from the first vault, built before men, before time. The book is not the original, only a fragment. A shard. The real one is buried beneath the ruins of Gharn-Alteth in the Black Alps." "The cathedral I saw," Emil murmured. Gregor looked up sharply. "You've seen it?" "In my dreams." The old man stood suddenly. "Then it knows your name. It will not stop now. You are becoming a translatus anime. A soul conduit." Emil gripped the table. "How do I stop it?" Gregor hesitated. Then slowly turned, lifting a leather curtain. Behind it was a wall, covered in spirals. Burned into the stone. "I've spent 20 years translating just 3 pages, Gregor said. "But if you have read 5 or more, there's no turning back. The only way to stop it." He paused, hand trembling as he wrote. "Is to finish the translation and take it back to where it began." Emil's breath hitched. "You want me to finish it?" Gregor met his eyes. "No. I want you to bury it deep in the earth before it finishes you." That night, Emil stayed in the monastery, unable to sleep. The candlelight flickered across the stone walls. The whispers grew louder again. This time they weren't just voices, they were memories. Screams. Rituals. 1,000 lives speaking through his mind at once. Some begged for help. Some threatened him. Some simply laughed. And then, through them all, a voice deeper than the others, one that sounded like stone cracking under pressure, spoke directly into his soul. "We see you now, Emil Crane. You are the mouth we have waited for. The spiral opens. The eye awakens. Come home, soul translator." And from the corner of the room, the case began to bleed. Thick black ichor seeped through the tape, running across the floor in spirals. And in the mirror above the desk, Emil saw himself, not asleep, not awake, but speaking. Mouth open wide. Eyes rolled back. And the spiral glowing on his forehead. The blood had frozen by morning. Gregor Vanya was gone, without a sound, without a trace. The bed remained neatly made and the books were untouched. As if he had never existed. But the black ichor that seeped from Emil's case the night before had solidified into a brittle shell, forming a spiral on the wooden floor like a sigil. Emil stepped over it carefully, clutching the heavy satchel. The book inside was cold now, unnaturally so, as if storing winter in its binding. He knew what he had to do. The name Gharn-Alteth had burned itself into his mind, as if carved by an invisible chisel. It was not on any map, but Gregor's notebook had described it. A forgotten cathedral deep in the Black Alps, older than the Roman Empire, sealed beneath glaciers and ruins lost to history. No one went that far anymore. Even hikers avoided the eastern ridge. But Emil was no longer no one. 3 days later, after hitching a ride with a fur-cloaked trucker and trekking 6 hours on foot through knee-deep snow, Emil stood at the base of the mountain. The wind here had a strange texture, thick and slow, like it passed through centuries before reaching his ears. Above him, the black peak of the mountain jutted into a sky filled with bruised clouds. Ice clung to the rocks like scars, and narrow paths carved by long-gone pilgrims wound toward the summit. He climbed. The wind grew louder with each step. Not whistling but chanting. Not in his ears. In his bones. Words from the book, hissing, scraping syllables he never remembered reading, filled his thoughts like a second heartbeat. Shar-Zhal'nith Nur. Li-Han-Droth. Spirith. 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 His knees buckled at one point. He vomited black fluid into the snow. It sizzled and steamed before disappearing. Still he climbed. By dusk Emil found it, the ruins of Gharn-Alteth. Half buried in ice and rock, the cathedral jutted from the mountainside like a fossilized carcass. Its towers were broken, its roof collapsed. The stone was covered in impossible carvings, shapes that twisted when looked at too long, forming and unforming spirals in the mind's eye. He stood before a massive stone door. No handles. No hinges. But at the center, a spiral groove. Emil's hand moved before he could stop it. He pressed the metal edge of the book into the groove. The spiral glowed. And the door opened inward with a deep, grinding moan. Inside was darkness. But not empty. The air itself felt aware like lungs holding breath. Emil lit a torch and descended a crumbling staircase carved from obsidian. Walls stretched high above him, engraved with murals depicting monstrous beings with spiral mouths and burning eyes. Worshippers knelt before them, tongues pulled from their mouths, offered like flowers. He walked deeper. The hallway forked, one path leading into darkness, the other lined with statues. But these were not saints. They were people. Frozen in stone, twisted in agony, mouths open wide in silent screams. Eyes gouged. Some had spirals carved into their chests. Others had none, but looked familiar. Gregor Vanya. The old woman from the train. His reflection. Emil ran. At the end of the path stood the sanctum. A circular chamber with no ceiling, open to the storming sky. The walls were covered in spiral glyphs, glowing faintly. In the center sat an altar. And on it, a twin to the book Emil carried. But larger. Alive. It pulsed like a heart, and the ground beneath it breathed. Emil approached, hand trembling. The whispers stopped. Then the book spoke aloud, but not in any voice. It spoke in every voice. You are here. You have read. You have become. Now speak the final name. Emil tried to scream, but his mouth moved on its own. He said something ancient. Something no man should ever say. The mountain shook. The altar cracked open. And from the chasm beneath it rose a creature made of spirals and bone, cloaked in darkness that crawled like insects. Its voice tore through reality. Shar-Zhal'nith. I am awakened. Emil collapsed. The book opened. Pages turned violently, faster and faster, until the symbols began lifting from the paper, spinning in the air, forming a vortex above him. Inside the spiral, Emil saw worlds dying. Towers falling. Oceans boiling. People screaming in languages they never spoke. And in every scene, a translator. Just like him. You are one of many mouths, the thing whispered. But the first to reach the root. Speak the last word and the veil shall burn. Emil wept. No. But he felt it rising again, the language living in his throat. Fighting it was like trying to stop a flood with thread. Until, from behind, a voice cried. Don't say it. Gregor. Half frozen, tongue missing, bloodied, but alive. He threw a vial of silver dust into the spiral. It screamed. The vortex hissed and flickered. Gregor pressed a knife into Emil's hand. You can still seal it. Blood for ink. Flesh for silence. Emil turned toward the book. The spiral creature roared. He opened the last page. It was blank, waiting. He pressed the blade to his palm. And began to write. The blade cut clean. Warm blood spilled onto the last blank page of the ancient book, soaking it like thirsty sand. For a moment there was silence. No chants, no storm, no voice. Just the slow drip of blood against parchment. Then the book reacted. The symbols carved themselves in real time, rising from Emil's wound and crawling across the page like insects made of language. They twisted into new spirals, alien syntax forming from pain and memory. Emil stared in horror as his own blood wrote not words, but a name. Shar-Zhal'nith. The word that ends words. A scream burst from his throat, not his voice but thousands layered atop one another. Male, female, child, ancient, screaming the name in unison. The book burned white. Gregor was flung against the stone wall, his body limp. The spiral creature above the altar convulsed, its form flickering, splitting like overlapping realities gone wrong. You dare define me. You dare write me. The entity's shape collapsed inward, like a star imploding in thought. Its spirals uncoiled and shattered into crawling glyphs, which darted across the floor like rats. Emil couldn't move. The book now glowed with a cold, greenish light. The language bled into the walls, the ceiling, even the air itself. The chamber shuddered violently, and from somewhere outside time, a second presence arrived. Not another god. A witness. The walls peeled open like skin, revealing not stone but void, an endless blackness speckled with luminous ruins, shattered moons, and what looked like cities made of bones spiraling through space. Floating there, anchored by nothing, was a mirror. But it reflected no image. Instead, Emil saw into it and beheld his other selves, translators in other eras, other worlds. Some still alive, others writhing in madness, their eyes replaced by spiral ink. One was hanging upside down from a cathedral ceiling, chanting to an invisible choir. Another sat in a wheelchair inside a sterile room, whispering forbidden verses to a child with black veins. And one was him, still holding the knife but smiling. You cannot seal what was never opened, it whispered across the void. You only translate. The message has always existed. Gregor groaned. Emil turned. The man was barely breathing, his face pale, lips cracked. Destroy it, he croaked. Before it finishes speaking through you. But it was too late. The book began tearing itself apart, pages flapping like wings, ink slashing through the air. From it rose a storm of living language, and at its center was a phrase Emil could feel behind his eyes. A phrase that, if said aloud, would break not just the mind, but time itself. His body rebelled. His jaw unhinged. The words rose up. Shari. Gregor lunged. The knife plunged into Emil's side. Pain exploded. Blood splattered onto the altar, the spiral, the broken mirror. And suddenly, the chanting stopped. The room darkened. The symbols froze mid-air. The void mirror shattered. Everything became still. Emil awoke in a hospital bed. Rain tapped the window gently. And 4 dripped nearby. For a moment, he believed it had all been a fever dream, until he turned to the table beside him. The book. Close. But different. No longer pulsating, no longer whispering. Instead, the cover bore a new symbol, a spiral, closed, inked in black wax. A seal. He had done it. He had written the name that ended the sentence. But at what cost? 2 weeks later, back in Vienna, Emil no longer dreamed. The silence in his mind was eerie, too perfect, like a room where someone had recently screamed but every sound was scrubbed away. He avoided mirrors. He burned his notes. He never opened the book again. But sometimes, when he walked past strangers on the street, they turned their heads suddenly as if hearing something. Their eyes would twitch and then they'd look away, afraid, confused, or reverent. And once, just once, a blind man touched Emil's wrist in a cafe and whispered, "You were not meant to end the language, only to pronounce its silence." The man died the next day. Back in the Alps, beneath the ruins of Gharn-Alteth, deep beyond the spiral altar and the sealed sanctum, a second book lies buried in ice. It breathes. It waits. And it knows Emil's name. Vienna, 1 year later. Snow fell like ash outside the library's high-arched windows, the sky a bruised gray. Emil sat alone in the special collections reading room, surrounded by tomes that no one had touched in decades. He was thin now, quiet. A shadow of the man who once hunted languages like prey. The book sat before him unopened. It had remained sealed, untouched since that night. The wax spiral on its cover had not cracked. No more voices. No more blood. Just silence. Too perfect. He had tried to move on. Lectures, guest articles, even a new translation of a lost Slavic prayer cycle. But nothing could shake the feeling that the words were still there, just out of reach, sleeping under his skin. And the dreams had returned. Not nightmares. Worse. Visions of clarity. Of a world where language was not a tool but a living thing. Where names could reshape stone. Where a well-placed sentence could open doors never meant to exist. In those dreams he always stood before the mirror in Gharn-Alteth, holding not a knife, but a pen. And the world behind him waited for him to write. One morning in spring Emil received a letter. No return address. Just a wax seal. Black. Inside, a single page handwritten in careful Latin. The seal is not eternal. Only understanding is. When the next one reads they will need a guide. And beneath that, the spiral is not a shape. It is a path. No signature. But the ink was familiar. His own. Emil returned to Gharn-Alteth that summer. Not with torches or knives or archaeologists. Just him, the book and a single journal. He descended the frozen paths alone, step by step, until the earth swallowed the light. The altar was still there. Crack. The spiral in the stone was no longer smooth. Something beneath had shifted, bulged, grown. He stood before it for a long time. Then opened the book. The wax broke like dry bark. The pages were blank. All of them. No ink. No blood. No name. And yet, he remembered every symbol. Every syllable. Every scream. He took out the journal and began to write. Not to release. Not to awaken. But to record. To warn. To tell the story. Years passed. The Gharn-Alteth ruins were buried again by snow and silence. No one remembered them. Even the locals forgot. Emil disappeared. No obituary. No funeral. No grave. Only a manuscript, left in the archives of the National Library of Austria, catalogued under Fiction Unpublished. Its title, The Sole Translator. A curious read. Strange. Disjointed. Too vivid to be real. And yet, sometimes when read alone at night, the final pages seem to hum just faintly. The ink feels warm. The spirals, familiar. But this is of course only a story. A work of fiction. There is no Gharn-Alteth. There is no forbidden book. There is no Emil Kraus. There is no language that can breathe or spiral that can speak or name that can end time. It's only a story. It must be. It has to be. Doesn't it?